The U.S. shuts down Russian oil imports in the face of the continued war in Ukraine. What else can be done? We'll ask Senator Debbie Stabenow. And the mayor has had enough of the world's fascination with Detroit's hollowed-out industrial skeletons. The drive to adjust the picture. Today is Sunday, March 13th, 2022, and this is Flashpoint. Hi there and welcome to Flashpoint. If you're wondering why we are on an hour earlier than usual this morning, you need to set your clock ahead by an hour. We sprang forward last night and it is indeed 10 a.m. If you're one of the many who are frustrated with this biannual clock tinkering, last year we had a fascinating conversation looking into why it's a little more complicated than many realize. We'll put a link to that conversation on the Flashpoint page at Click on Detroit. It is worth a watch as you adjust your watch. Ahead this morning, we're going to talk about the Russian war on Ukraine. You know, the Kremlin still insists that I have that wrong, that this is not a war. Now, there's an old saying that the first casualty of war is the truth, and for the Russian people, that's never been truer. And that is a big problem because one of the most appealing ways to see this whole matter to an end is for the Russian people to rise up against it. Now, many have tried, and they've been thrown in jail for that. And a compliant state media is keeping many others in the dark about what is actually happening. Now, the U.S. did move to block Russian oil imports this week. Some believe that was long overdue. Others believe that's more style than substance. Michigan Senator Debbie Stabenow believes oil companies are enjoying these high gas prices a little too much to be motivated to do anything about it, like, say, drill for more oil. We're going to talk with her in just a minute. We're also going to talk about a couple of key elements from Mayor Duggan's State of the City address from this past Tuesday. He opened and closed his remarks with a commitment to stop being the poster child for post-industrial wreckage. He's had it with what hasn't happened at the old Packard plant, and this week also saw a big announcement about the old Fisher body plant. These are two hulking pieces of the kind of ruin porn the mayor was talking about. Can they join the old train depot in changing the conversation about Detroit? It's all this morning on Flashpoint. All right, let's start with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This past week, President Biden moved to outlaw any Russian oil imports. What is left in the American toolbox, or the worldwide toolbox for that matter, to apply any further pressure on Vladimir Putin, and is he susceptible to that? Let's talk about it with Michigan's senior senator, Senator Debbie Stabenow, joining us from the nation's capital. Senator, I so appreciate the time this morning. Let me say at the outset that you and I are recording this conversation and, of course, reacting to events as we know them right now, because it's a very changeable situation. But you just this past Thursday spent a lot of time talking to a lot of our allies in the European Union. You were on a call with President Zelensky earlier in the week. Give me your thoughts right now on whether or not we're doing all that we can, or is there anything left for us still to do in the United States to try to bring this to a peaceful closure of some kind?
Well, Devin, it's always great to be with you. I really appreciate your work. And let me just start by saying, I mean, that question is the question we are constantly working with people on. But I have to start out just by saying just what we all feel in terms of the devastation and the brutality of Putin and what's happening to the Ukrainian people. And it's unbelievable, unprovoked, horrible, and the courage that we see all the time of moms and dads and grandpas and grandmas and people who are fighting for their country. And it's clear that Putin totally underestimated the commitment of the Ukrainian people to fight for their freedom and for democracy. And that sure came through on the call with President Zelensky. Unbelievable. I mean, the sense of inspiration. We had Democrats and Republicans on that call, and we were on a Zoom, and we all came away just in awe of, on the one hand, the danger every moment that he is in, and the courage and the inspiration, and it's shown every day. And so the question is, we've got to do everything humanly possible to support them. And as you mentioned, and we have stop. There's strong economic sanctions, financial sanctions. We're looking to see, what else can be done there. But frankly, most of what has been done is what can be done. But we're open to other things that need to happen. And we are, I think, most importantly, working with our allies, because this really has an impact on Putin if it is done with all of our European allies. And so that's why the meeting that we had with all of them, all of the ambassadors, was equally amazing and inspirational, because there's not an inch of difference with anybody about what we are trying to do. We just passed this last week, almost a $14 billion package of aid to Ukraine, in addition to the weapons we've been providing and so on. About half of that humanitarian aid, the other half military aid. And as we are moving forward now, there are all the questions about the best way strategically to deal with what is happening on the bombings, how to equip the Ukrainians, talking with the Polish ambassador, talking to others about planes, but also hearing now about long-range missiles that may be as effective or more effective in addressing this. So it is a constant conversation about how fast we can get the things that will be most effective to protect the Ukrainians. And I have to say, it's astounding to me, the brutality and the planning of Putin to just wantonly kill people. I was on a call with Ukrainians from Michigan, and of course everyone's heartbroken and doing everything they can to send aid and to advocate and so on. But I was hearing about along the corridors where folks are trying to escape, that there are little, what they are calling butterfly mines, which are, it looks like plastic toys. Right. That the kids can pick up, and it's not enough to kill somebody, but it's enough to blow up your fingers. I mean, how cruel is that?
Well, Senator, unless I am completely lost on the definition of war crimes, that's what we're watching. Yeah. The position has been from most in Washington from the very get-go that we can't see putting American troops on the ground, and yet when you watch a maternity hospital blown apart, as we did this past week, is there any growing consideration that we need to do more than sanctions and money?
Well, we have to do everything we can in terms of weapons and support for Ukraine. We are in a very challenging situation with a madman, I think, who has nuclear weapons. And so, the challenge of, on the one hand, not starting World War III, which is actually not an impossible thing to see if we're not all working together carefully. And at the same time, we have to do everything we can to stop the killing and help the Ukrainians be able to stop the bloodshed that fighting for their country, fighting for their freedom. And so weapons are a part of that. Tactical weapons support, military aid in terms of supporting them. And they're saying to us, President Zelensky says, we'll fight the fight. We just need the tactical arms, the support, the military aid, and so on. And that's what we're doing.
All of this is going to, of course, have economic reverberations around the world. Right. We just watched last week Consumer Price Index coming out, jumping to its highest spot in the last 40 years. And to many economists' way of thinking, that doesn't even yet really start to figure in the impact of what's gone on over these last 2 weeks in Ukraine. Right. Are you convinced that the U.S. Is equipped both I guess with intestinal fortitude to watch these prices go higher if that's what it takes? And as a Democrat, are you ready for the accompanying criticism that's going to come that we're already hearing, that the White House and the Democratic Party has been in denial too long that we are still very strongly attached to the IV of oil?
Well, certainly don't have to tell me that as the person leading the effort on electric vehicles. I mean, the best way, just think about when we fully get our electric vehicles being made in Michigan, you're going to drive right by the pump.
But, Senator, I drive an electric vehicle, and the price of electricity jumped 8% too,
Right.
because so much of our electricity comes from fossil fuels.
That's true. Fair enough. That's true. Absolutely true. Which is why the whole strategy on clean energy is important. You're absolutely right. You know, first of all, prices are way too high, and it's gas was bad enough before, but all the prices that are coming because of inflation that started because of the supply chain breakdowns we all know about, you know, the chips and manufacturing and food supply breakdowns and all of that. And then now on top of this, certainly what's happening in Ukraine and so on. But I also want to just have a caveat here. The top 24 oil companies last year made $174 billion in profits. They have some 9,000 leases that the government has given them in the United States to drill that they're not using right now, which keeps supply down and prices up. And there's serious issues about the companies taking advantage of the situation and price gouging, which I think is going on and is going to continue to go on. And one of the things the White House is pushing back on strongly is that, you know, if we have them as the American people are being asked to pay more at the pump because of the effort to support Ukraine against Putin and their fight for freedom, the oil companies should not be taking, the opportunity for collusion or price gouging. And I've talked to the head of the Federal Trade Commission, who is looking at a number of cases where they are seeing this going on right now. We produce more oil right now than any other place in the world. People don't realize that. And we have very little that comes in, about 3%.
And yet we've had to reach out to others. My political mentor taught me there's no such thing as permanent friends or permanent enemies, only permanent interests. And yet, do you think it was wise for the White House to reach out to Venezuela, with whom we're barely on speaking terms, and Saudi Arabia, who many people believe we should not be on speaking terms with? Is that where we should be turning for help?
Well, right now we're in a situation where it's all hands on deck with the countries of the free world against what is happening with Putin, who literally I think is willing, to create a world war to try to take back what he views as elements of the Soviet Union. And so this is a very, very serious moment. But I will tell you that in terms of our saying we are not going to take Russian oil was more symbolic than what, because we don't use a lot of Russian oil. Now it's very different with our European allies, very, very different. And more courageous of them, frankly, in talking to the German ambassador and others when they say they're not going to, much more courageous. But the reality is that these prices are not set by the government. They're set by, the world markets, which are determined based on how much oil is being pumped, and our companies are not pumping as much as they could. There's more capacity in the United States, but we're opening strategic oil reserves, working with other countries, as you mentioned, to have more oil in the marketplace, so there's more supply. But the oil companies could be doing that too. There's actually legislation that's called use it or lose it. If you want those leases, you don't get to lease it, have the lease, hold on to it, so you can just stop more supply so the price goes up, which is what is happening right now. I mean, I view major manipulation going on and price gouging. And so that's part of the pushback as we look at this. We don't need oil companies taking advantage of the horrible atrocities and what's happening in Ukraine and the world trying to support them. This is not the moment for them to take advantage of that. And
I got to get to a break. These are fraught times, and you've had some very sobering thoughts here, unfortunately, to share. I'm afraid. Hopefully, better news ahead soon. But I really appreciate you always as being with us on Flashpoint. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
You bet. Back with more. This is Flashpoint on Local 4.
At DraftKings Casino, we give credit where credit is due in the form of credit plus a bonus. Download DraftKings Casino and get up to $50 in free credits to use on any game. Plus a deposit bonus up to $2,000. Now, roll credits.
From where I'm sitting, looks like you need floors that can handle spills. Yikes. Well, for a great deal on stain-resistant floors, go to Carpet One.
Here to floor you. And right now at Independent Carpet One, it's our Don't Stress the Mess flooring sale. Save big and take advantage of 18-month no-interest financing. Only at Independent Carpet One.
It's time for you to celebrate and save, because it's our biggest anniversary sale ever at Gardner White. We have it. Get the best deal on Detroit's largest selection of in-stock Tempur-Pedic mattresses. Sleep on it tonight and pay later with 0% financing for 60 months. That's as low as $1 a day. Plus, free 50-inch TVs, $300 MasterCards, and free same-day delivery. The anniversary sale, only at Gardner White, Michigan's elite Tempur-Pedic dealer.
At DraftKings Casino, we give credit where credit is due, in the form of credit, plus a bonus. Download DraftKings Casino and get up to $50 in free credits to use on any game. Plus a deposit bonus up to $2,000. Now, roll credits.
All right, welcome back. Tuesday night, the mayor delivered his 9th State of the City address, and he bookended it with the issue that many refer to as ruin porn. It's, of course, more than just a matter of complaining about the pictures. We are watching the metamorphosis of the train station, for example, but that took the deep pockets and long vision of Ford. Can we do it at some of the other massive eyesores of Detroit? Let's talk about it with Nicole Sherrard-Freeman, Group Executive for Jobs, Economy, and Detroit for the Detroit at Work, for the City of Detroit. Richard Hosey is the developer of the Fisher 21 Lofts project, and Annalise Frank is the City Hall reporter for Crain's Detroit Business. Gang, this is the first in-person Flashpoint that we've had in 2 years. So thanks so much for helping us repioneer what shouldn't be all that unusual, but it's great to see you all in person. Nicole, let me start with you. It was really interesting to me. The mayor usually takes great pains to not talk about big things first, big splashy projects. He's very disciplined about keeping his focus on neighborhoods. It said a lot to me that he started and ended with this big issue of getting some of these hulking structures turned around and off of so many camera and Instagram posts all over the country.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, those structures have been in the forefront for those of us who are from and love Detroit for decades. And so it felt right to him to start with the big things that he tackled and to put that front and center.
He talked about seeing, I wish I had been standing with him when he was in this art gallery in Washington, D.C., where that was the vision that people were seeing of Detroit, this old, these crumbling ruins. That was obviously a pretty powerful moment for him.
It was. I mean, that's hard stuff. I mean, it's hard to imagine that there are those of us who are entertained by decay and the unfortunate circumstances of others, but it's what motivated him, and it's part of what motivates us in City Hall.
Richard, you're taking on one of these massive projects. I'm thrilled at the prospect of it, but this is the old Fisher body plant is a massive ruin at the moment. Why is it different? Because we all watched with great hope the Packard plant, and for 8 years nothing happened. Why does it feel different to you?
So I think laying out the economics, so we always go with figuring out the numbers first and seeing if there are certain things that can be met, then is this viable? So and talk to the bankers and talk to the state and the city and figure out a plan, and then we go and look at the structure to make sure, and the environmentals. So it's in a gray area, but also we took cues from all around the country of what works, and so we're always looking for new solutions and applying them to right here in Detroit.
It was always explained to me that one of the reasons why more things like this don't happen and why it took so long with the train station, it's really difficult to amortize what it costs cost you to fix up something, just the environmental cleanup alone, but then finding something to put into those structures that pays for all it took to bring it back to life.
Right.
But you think you've the math here works, obviously, or you wouldn't be doing it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so one thing is we're deep into a period where people now believe that people will live in the city of Detroit. You know, if you look back 10 years, people said, could you ever feel something like the Broderick Tower? Now we know people will live here, so you have this stable concept of what will work, and you build around that.
Annalise, you can forgive, though, some Detroiters whose eyes roll when they hear about plans for a big turnaround project like these because of things like Packard. Packard plant's just one of them, but the city's suing now Fernando Palazuelo, who has held that and not done very much with it over all this time. There's fatigue here, isn't there, on some of these big projects, that some of which never quite come through?
Yes, I think that, you know, there is sort of a natural aspect of skepticism for some of this, and you know, of course, the mayor on Wednesday highlighted the Packard plant, and as you said, is suing to get the rights to demolish that, and as they say, you know, hopefully have the current owner of the Packard plant foot the bill. But there were a lot of promises made there, and you know, signs that are sort of, they had been up at the site and are sort of deteriorating now. So yeah, it's you know, it's a massive plans. I mean, I think the roof is like 2 acres, right? There's, I mean, there's so much.
I used to talk about a roof in terms of acres.
It's giant. So I think, you know, and certainly, you know, at Crane's looking at the numbers, you know, that's something that will continue to follow, but. You know, the mayor certainly laid out, you know, a number of projects. He had these 12 sort of ruins, quote unquote, and you know, with the Packard plant being the 12, and the 11 leading up to that, you know, including the train station and Lee Plaza, which is a tower that's going to be renovated into senior housing and market rate housing. So he was showing, you know, his track record during his administration on those projects, and some of those have been delayed, and there are you know, some skepticism on some of those being finished, but he is really trying to show that progress has been made on these.
It's not, Nicole, just obviously we've had COVID delays have created sort of this weird gap of 2 years, but there's also this concern now about how COVID changes our lives going forward, one of which is where people want to live, and do they have to commute to work? If people are not going to necessarily have to go to work in the numbers that they used to, how does that change your job and the outlook for these projects we're talking about? Yeah, well, I'll tell you, we believe that if the patterns continue to hold and there are more residents who work from home, that just makes projects like Fisher Body 21 or the Fisher Lofts all the more important, because where you live and work and play could potentially all be the same place. So thinking about how do you repurpose existing commercial space, how do you repurpose industrial space to fit the new dynamic is top of mind for the mayor and the administration. So you don't think that the dynamic changes away from city living necessarily just because people don't have to go to a job that's in the city? I don't. I believe that we will rethink in its entirety how each of us frames where we live and where we work. And quite frankly, there are so many amenities taking shape in downtown Detroit. Downtown Detroit's a beautiful place and is becoming more beautiful, and I think it'll be more attractive. Richard, the mayor also took great pains to talk about what the minority ownership picture and the involvement of this. This is, I know, must register strongly and profoundly with you. It's been a massive problem for many, many years. Is it changing?
So it's changing slowly. We're identifying the barriers and removing them as we can, with the help of the city particularly. And there's programs out there. Capital Impact has a program that is designed to train people of color who already have some experience but want to get deeper into commercial development. And then one of the wonderful things we have here in Detroit, which I haven't experienced elsewhere, is really collaboration and solution sharing for, amongst developers. And so we're just extending that to everyone, regardless of race and the like, and finding out the ways that we can make all of these people have a better opportunity.
Annalise, I apologize. I've only got about 30 seconds left, but what was your other biggest takeaway from the mayor's address the other night? I talked about the bookends being this issue. What was your biggest takeaway from what the mayor talked about the other night?
Yeah, another huge focus was jobs and training, talking about 13,000 open positions at Detroit at Work, which is in Nicole's purview and a major plank for the mayor. And, the challenge will be getting those jobs to people who need them, and of course getting middle wage jobs and the ability to enter the middle class.
And paying people while they train, which we'll obviously be watching that very closely. Gang, so great to see you in person. I got to take another quick commercial break. Back with more on Flashpoint right after this.
Looking for dinner made easy? Move over meal prep and make way for pre-chopped and pre-portioned ingredients. Hit the road hard to follow recipes and say hello to easy breezy meals. Peace out, pile of dishes, and welcome easy cleanup. Well, hello there, Home Chef. Home Chef oven-ready meals, pre-chopped and pre-portioned recipes without the prep or mess. Get $90 off your first month at homechef.com. Home Chef, delicious meat simple.
Buckfire Law.
A car accident. The death of a loved one. Nursing home neglect. Medical malpractice. A dog attack. We know just what to do. We know how the legal system works and how to talk to insurance companies. You've been wronged. We'll make it right. Call us 855-BUCKFIRE.
At DraftKings Casino, we give credit where credit is due, in the form of credit. Sign up with DraftKings Casino and get up to $50 in free credits, plus a deposit bonus up to $2,000. That's like extra credit in the form of a bonus. Download the DraftKings Casino app or play online today. Get up to $50 in credits to use on any game, plus a deposit bonus up to $2,000. Now, roll credits.
Welcome back. Annalise just kind of teed this up quickly, talking about the training that is going to go on, and that's your area now.
That's right. There's a $100 million Detroit at Work scholarship fund that the mayor announced at State of the City. Go to DetroitAtWork.com or call us if you've got interest. We've got an opportunity.
We'll put a link to it at clickondetroit.com. Thanks so much, gang. Really appreciate it, and thank you as well. Meet the Press coming up next. Have a great week. We'll see you next time for Flashpoint.